I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to D2Z, a podcast about using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm Gen Z entrepreneur Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of retention as a service agency, Electric, as well as the co-founder and CEO of Scaleless. Today, I'm talking with Gaby Tegen, who's the founder and CEO of Smartrr, which is a subscription commerce platform. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into things here, can you give everybody a quick background on yourself?
Absolutely. Grew up in New York and had exposure to quite a world in commercial real estate and residential real estate. Ended up going to school in DC and spent some time in Israel, about a year in Israel, where I was exposed to Startup Nation for the first time. Got to work out of the Wix office and the Facebook office and learned about the speed at which startups are able to move. And that was very different from what I was used to in real estate. So upon graduating, wanted to marry the both, honestly. And I found myself in commercial real estate media and events, and then a wonderful data SaaS prop tech company. And then COVID started. And for me, everything changed. Working from home was difficult. I was managing a team that I loved, but it became a little lonely. And that was kind of what caused the inception of Smartrr. It was a combination of maybe a little bit too much time at home with talking to people locally and understanding the challenges that they were having. At the time, it was like a pet project. It was like COVID was going to be, 2 months long, 3 months long, and now we're still talking about it years later. But that was the inception. And since then, I've gotten married, I've had a baby, moved to Hoboken in Jersey. So a lot has changed, but we're still headquartered in New York, about 30 people, mostly R&D. And yeah, hopefully that's a helpful background.
Yeah, I think COVID was one of those things that just sort of kept dragging on and on and on. And then, now the effects of it are still present today, even, a year plus removed from what happened. And there's still ripple effects in terms of how quickly some of the companies I saw grew during that period and then subsequently retracted. But then there's just also dynamics when it comes to the way that businesses are, even forming and structuring the way that they build and grow their teams now. It's so much more dispersed and, all over the country, if not the world, in a way that it wasn't, previous to that.
Absolutely. No, I think the global workforce and the rise of being able to have people across all time zones and creating a collaborative environment with that global team is probably the best thing that came from COVID. I mean, I know that's a weird thing to say, but I remember pre-COVID, companies that I worked at had teams mainly that were in office, but there were some disparate teams, maybe overseas for engineering or for support or whatever it is, but they never felt like a part of our company. And now with so many people working remotely, I feel like there's both the conversation happening and also now tech that can allow these companies to work more as a community, even with people all over the world. So yeah, I think that's a big win.
Yeah, I mean, like for the new business, Scaleless, we would not have been able to do what we've done to this point if it wasn't for the cost efficiencies that come from like nearshoring. I mean, we would probably have spent triple at this point, which wouldn't have been feasible to get to where we are. And it's a model that was there before COVID, but I think became even more prevalent, and then also removed some of the hesitancies or stereotypes that people had around the quality of work that's coming out of other areas. And whether it's, there's even folks in the Shopify ecosystem. Like we originally got connected to Brazil through the founders of Super Affiliate, and they have so much of their team down there. And now we have a team of 15 down there, and they have like their own little mini HQ, and it's just there's so much good that can come from that. But there are a lot of downsides, I think, if you're too distributed. Like I don't want us to be in 80 different cities. I'd prefer we've got a few hubs and somebody has some sort of proxy to each of those, because the in-person stuff I miss the most about when I had first started and grew the agency was all the stuff that we got to do outside of the office, or those things that just happen by chance that you can't replicate in a digital environment.
It's interesting that you say that. Frankly, I don't know what the right answer is. And we originally moved into an office space that we love deeply years ago, like during COVID when we were growing the team originally, because I agree with what you said. I thought it would be impossible to cultivate a community or culture at a company that's just starting remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the answer is, but at some point that probably becomes less true. As you've built the foundation of a company, you probably can allow for more flexibility. I see companies like, Postscript, that seem to do it pretty well and still make time to meet in person and gather. So I don't know what the perfect equation is. Maybe you do, but I think there is flexibility. Yeah, what do you think?
I think it depends on the stage of the company that you're at. Like having, building a new business now, it was important to me that we were just in like Miami and Brazil, because, if there was 20 of us and we're all scattered around the world, it's just not the same sort of integration and connection amongst those founding team members. And I think now is a very critical point that we have that. And we're also not mature enough as a company to be able to accept somebody in who, I don't know, who lives in Washington, and to make them feel like they're actually a part of the team, because we just don't have the systems and procedures in place to be able to do so. Whereas you can look at a Shopify who, has a distributed global workforce, but they spend a lot of money on those bursts and bringing the teams together for a week at a time in various different cities. And, everybody that I've spoken to who works there loves them, because it gives them like a full uninterrupted week of just being together. And then they get to go back and, live their separate lives. But if they didn't have those weeks, they would feel very disconnected from, the team. And I think there's a lack of, I don't know if loyalty is the right word, but it's the same way with like clients. When I had clients before, I would try and meet them in person, because it's just way different. You have that connection that can only come from meeting in person, versus on a screen, you're very desensitized. It's the same reason why people will, talk shit on Twitter, and then you see them in person and they don't say anything. It's because of that medium that's in between that engenders people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do.
I didn't know that happened on Twitter.
I am not a Twitter person, frankly.
No, either. Smartrr has made me. I deleted Twitter, and I told our marketing team to never give me the password for any of our.
Yeah, the loudest voices always shine brightest on social media. I feel like LinkedIn, it's not as bad, whereas Twitter is just like an absolute mess of nonsense.
I have to put that in the universe's hands, and just hope that things come around and people are seen for who they are with time.
Well, TikTok is a platform that is presenting a lot of opportunities for e-com brands, but at a more macro level, I think is rather scary, because of how we're moving towards just like an information gathering society that relies upon these like 3 to 10 second clips and makes very quick and informed judgments without necessarily any sort of follow through or due diligence on the source of said information. And I've met like family friends, kids who are 14, 15 or under, and they're so strange, honestly. Like they're just weird. And like, it's just like, they're like TikTok kids. Like I just can't relate to anything. I feel like the divide between me when I was 15 and a 25-year-old was not as great as it is right now.
Can you what do you mean? Like, what's an example of how they're weird?
Maybe weird is the wrong term, but they're so focused on like trends, and they're so hyper aware of their social standing and status within like their groups in a way that I would imagine is probably not super healthy. And even things like Snapchat, I learned about this a couple of weeks ago. On Snapchat, you have like the locations, so you can see where people are. Well, if you're, in middle school and you see all your friends, they're in one location, but you're not. You're on a different part of that Snapchat map. Like that has led to issues too. So it's so much of this social climbing and hierarchy thing that is developing as a byproduct of it.
I have so many thoughts. First off, the TikTok mention, honestly, I had to delete TikTok. It's very addictive.
Yeah.
Like that is truly an addictive app, and I give them a lot of credit. I hate to say that, but it's you gotta appreciate, like that's a solid use of an app. People
Yeah.
are on it hours and hours a day, to the point where TikTok even serves you ads that you've been using TikTok for too long and to go meditate. I don't know if you've gotten. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's a good
It's a
thing.
good
That
thing.
means that I spend too much time on TikTok. Um, but that's one of the things that I feel like is a major con of no longer having like the office space or any kind of hub that you're going to. Maybe it's your basketball group, or a weekly poker game, or it could be the office. That's what it was for me, where pre-COVID we would talk about what shows just came out, what movies to go see, we thought about the political debate that happened last night.
Hmm.
And that was almost like the truth meter. Like we could use that to gauge from people that we know and trust what is true and what isn't. And now we're relying on people that we don't know, to your point, in 10 seconds communicating a story. And that's pretty scary to me. And then on the front of teenagers, I have teenagers in my family, and the stories that they tell me are horrendous.
Hmm.
This social status thing, the like needing likes, asking people to like your post so that you're not alone in that. I mean, like honestly, sometimes I feel like I need to do that. It's a very hard thing to navigate as a teenager, I will say. And that Snapchat map thing, that was around when I can't imagine that you're older than I am, but around the time that we were growing up, I'm 30. Around the time that we were growing up, Snapchat blew up. I guess maybe in high school or college. And I
Yeah.
remember seeing the people's locations and being like, "Oh fuck, I wasn't invited."
Right.
So I've been there, and it's tough when you're developing and like you don't know who you are yet. Sometimes, that's that's brutal.
Yeah. There's just so much external pressure that never existed before when you could just live. Like I have some friends here who are like 45, and they were just telling me about what middle school was like or what high school was like. Like that sounds so much more wholesome than the high school that even we experience versus what people are experiencing now. So
And I wonder if honestly your experience was like I don't know what the high school boy experience was at the time that we were growing up, if you know what I mean. But I can tell you, growing up in high school and college, photo editing became huge. And
yeah.
when the technology is new, and even now, I mean, TMZ always reports on like celebrities botched photoshopping. But imagine you're in high school, college, and honestly, I've never told the story before, but honestly, one time I posted a picture that had been edited to make me look thinner, and this
Hmm.
boy messaged me and was like, "This is photoshopped," and I was so mortified. I like had a huge meltdown about it. This was in high school, um, but yeah, it was very traumatizing. And then to be confronted over things like that. And the only reason that girls were editing their photos is because they would go on Instagram and see everyone looking thinner than them or having curves or whatever it is. And it's a terrible image to set because it's not real.
Yeah. Instagram is not reality by any means.
How many people, if you go now, my Instagram is like, I, how many people have yachts? How does everyone have a yacht now?
Everybody
What
has
are
a
we
yacht.
doing?
Everybody has a Ferrari. Everybody has a private plane. I don't know if you saw the people who were like renting private planes so that they could post
And it
about it
was
on
not even
Instagram.
a plane. It was like a fake window that was like a toilet seat converted to make it look. It was
Exactly.
crazy.
Yeah. Which is just it's funny but scary, but it is pretty funny.
So there was a couple of weeks ago, someone was just like showing me something on Instagram, and so the feed came up, and someone that popped up on their thing had a picture right outside of a yacht, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, what a baller! And we look at the picture, and it was like a cropped picture that we figured out was actually from a boat show that he had just been outside of. He wasn't even in the boat show, but he like zoomed it in enough to where the picture looked like he was on a yacht. It's too much.
That's awesome. You gotta love the ingenuity.
It's too much. It's very funny though. But yeah, I hope that the kids are nice to each other.
Well, yeah, we'll see. That's a problem for somebody else to solve. I don't think I have the wherewithal there, but
I think if we can, as adults, even young adults, but still adults, if we can represent what good looks like, that's probably the best way that we can have an impact on the youth, you know?
I think maybe the one of the positives that has come out of it is this hyper focus on like experiences over material things. Um, so much of younger shoppers are prioritizing experiences over, you know, fashion labels or, things that maybe were valued a little bit more 10, 20 years ago. And it's so experience focused, whether it's trips or brands that have some sort of component of experience built within them. It seems like those are the ones that the younger audiences are resonating with more than your historic like legacy brands that just don't have that same personal connection to their audience.
And we also see, well, we see it in two ways. One is through physical experience, events, but also a strong social media presence, strong subscription offering, et cetera, et cetera. But we also see it in the type of product that's being sold. So if you're selling just, this is very broadly speaking, but for example, you're selling a beauty product. If you're selling a beauty product that is competing with every other beauty product, that's much harder to make successful than if you package it as like a girls' night beauty product where you get 3 face masks and cleanser for the group of friends to do together. Online cooking that, boxes that basically ship to your house, and then you get to do a cooking show and make the food with the chef online, or pottery kits that you can do at home and paint vases and ceramic tiles with, whatever. Like those are the products that are doing well, because people want to interact with the product rather than just consume it, I think.
Yeah. The product is sort of a necessary item needed for that experience, but the experience is really what is being bought. And, the products, there's 1,000 ceramic companies, there's 1,000, at this point, or even coffee. Like, how many more coffee brands do there really need to be? How are you going to differentiate yourself when everybody has the same quality, everybody has the same certifications, and a lot of it comes down to like that experience marketing and creating unique ways that people can engage with the brand, but then share it too. Like the shareable component of a lot of these events, whether virtual or in person, is, that just expands your reach and awareness even more.
Definitely coffee is a great product to sell online because of its recurring nature. But I'm curious, since it is so saturated, if you've seen any brands that really stand out to you and how they're offering coffee more uniquely as an experience.
I think, there's ones that go about it from a packaging standpoint. I don't know how they're doing now, but I know like Cometeer was relatively big during COVID, and Jot was another one, which was like the little bottles that I'm sure helped also with their costs when it came to fulfillment and all those things, but also provided consumers with a different like approach to your standard whole bean bag or your ground bag. So you see that in other categories too, like with wine, as opposed to having wine in a bottle, you now have like wine in cans or little sampler wine programs that you get to taste, 15 different wines for $80 a month. And there's experience created around that. You're meeting the winemakers, you're doing things like that. So I think there's been a lot of innovation when it comes to the way that products are packaged and then actually, delivered to the customer through that experience.
Could not agree more. That's exactly what we're trying to build. A more accessible way for brands to be able to offer those unique experiences. So preaching to the choir.
What's the coolest experience that you've seen thus far, done with or without Smartrr?
That's a good question. Without Smarter, I'll have to think about. I mean, there's a couple that come to mind. One is I'm a sucker for a digital experience. So anything that can encompass, to your point, like an online tasting or a cooking class, I think is really immersive and can be used in so many different ways. I've seen brands do a cooking class that, you can buy, I can buy, but then also that you can do for corporate gifting. And then the team gets to gather and do that event together. So there's a lot of different use cases that I feel like can be pretty wide in terms of breadth through that digital experience. But I don't want to go with your answer, so I'm not going to copy you. There's a brand that we work with that I was actually just targeted on, which I don't know how I ended up being their target, but I was targeted on Amazon. It's called Next Playground, and it kind of reminds me almost like a modern day Wii. If you remember did you have a Wii?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
I love
remember
the Wii.
so
I was very good at the Wii.
what was your sport? Did you have were you a tennis guy?
Usually baseball, and then
Hmm.
some tennis,
Right.
and
That's
then
neat.
some
Anything
golf.
that had like a bat or like something that you could swing or hit.
Yeah, and the boxing was pretty fun too. Um,
I remember being again in like middle school and going to a friend's house and doing the boxing, and I was like terrified, which looking back was silly. But Next is a cool one. They are basically it's almost like it's literally like a modern day Wii, but what we power for them is a digital subscription. We have another company that does almost like an Aura ring. It's a competitor to Aura. That again, basically what you're paying for is the data that ring collects. And I think any products that can help make us better are good. So anything that can facilitate exercise or just knowledge of your health, whether it's measuring heartbeat or how you're sleeping, I think are really powerful and do good for the world. So, well, at least I hope they do. So those are the type I like.
I have I think it's called Eight Sleep, um, and they have that like cooling mattress, but then they have the digital subscription, and uh, I imagine that makes most of the profit for
Mhm.
that company. And I mean, I actually I went with one of their competitors where you don't have to like get an app, because I'm like, I just want my bed to be cold. I don't need, I already have like 8 different trackers. I don't need my bed to also be
That's
tracking
fair.
me and pay. You're locked in. Like you literally cannot buy the mattress or the topper without also signing up for the monthly or annual subscription to have access to the data to be able to use it. And so, like, I feel like that's an awesome business model. But as consumers get more and more savvy, I wonder if there will be any pushback to some of these things, because not everybody wants to, engage in that way.
I think Eat Sleep is a phenomenal example. What I thought was basically impossible. I don't know why I thought it was impossible, but what I thought was impossible was to sell successfully at high volume an expensive initial product. I thought would set it up for success as a subscription because it's something that you've invested in heavily at first. And there's a lot of studies that speak to once someone buys something, they're basically unlikely to return it.
Yeah.
Is psychologically what happens. And so that was my theory initially going into Smartrr. And boy, was I wrong. Look at Peloton. Everyone bought a Peloton at the beginning of COVID, and you're like, this company has made it. Like there's no fall of Peloton that I saw at least.
Yeah.
And then everyone started selling their Pelotons, and it really screwed their business. So, but I think Eight Sleep is an interesting one, and I think I can say this as someone whose husband has bad insomnia, and I have gotten bad insomnia more recently. Is without sleep, you're literally nothing. So a good night's sleep is so worth every penny.
Yep. It definitely can make or break your day.
It's the worst when you don't. I had COVID 2 weeks ago, um, and I didn't realize what it was at first, and I just remember feeling so exhausted, and then coming to terms with what it was later on. But initially, I was like, what's wrong with me? Like I slept. And you don't realize how much of a it's like more important than drinking a glass of water before you go to work, you know?
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah, it's like tracking those variables that like heart rate variability as an example. I didn't know what that was until a couple of years ago, and now I could sleep for 10 hours, but you wake up and your HRV is way lower than what it is normally, and you're like, oh, well, yeah, I am sick, or I am feeling this way, and it makes sense. So I need to rest even more. Versus, you could sleep for less, but you're in a better like sort of health state to begin with, so you're fine. Like that's the adequate amount that your body needs at that time. And there's just a lot of really interesting stuff around that. But to your point about sleep, as a founder, how do you deal with uh, compartmentalizing thoughts or stress so that you can actually sleep? Because I know I've woken up sometimes, you know way before my alarm clock's supposed to go off, but now I'm just up because now I'm thinking about everything that I need to do, and like that's just sort of it. So what are some of the ways that you've been able to handle that?
Yeah. I have spent so much time trying to handle that because I'm by nature pretty, I think a lot about every decision. I overthink and I have some pretty anxious tendencies. And I can be even obsessive at times. I have OCD, and being in this role has really triggered a lot of that, to be honest. Like I was like the most anxious, the least well slept I had ever been, because it's a lot of pressure being in this role, right? Like no job is easy by any means, but I feel the pressure of the team that I want to be supporting, both like emotionally day to day, but also financially. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a really big honor, but it's pressure. And that can get into every element of your life. I found that having a coach, someone that you can speak to, is kind of a game changer, kind of totally changed my life. The coach that I work with has a psych background, and so she's able to tie in the things that I experience in business with who I am as a person and give me suggestions on how to like combat some of the normal tendencies that I have. Um, and then and I know that that's a lot, so ask any questions. But then also small things like I think it's like $10 extra a month. I was able to get a second phone, and so I have two phones, one for work, one for personal. That changed my life. My work phone doesn't leave the kitchen, so once I come into the apartment, it's kind of packed away and charging. And then my personal phone is, I read the news and text my friends, and that's been really good. But I do things like that. I have like little games that I have constructed to create good boundaries to the extent that we can. But it's hard. Yeah, it's no joke.
No, I like that one because Slack is pretty much just like a part of me at this point. And it was even worse during COVID because what the hell else were you doing? You weren't doing anything. You're just sitting there. So you were pretty much just available from like the moment you woke up to the moment that you went to bed. Now it's gotten a little bit better because other people are doing things too, but it's still
Like,
suffocating.
I, I don't know what kind of living conditions you were in, but we were in a really small one bedroom right before COVID started. And so we're both working from home. So you're like on your couch all day or at your dining room table all day. And then where do you have dinner? At the same dining room table that you were working since 7 o'clock. And that's not good. You need space. And I know that space is a privilege, having an extra phone, all of these things are a privilege. So they might not be accessible to everyone at all times, which I'm totally not taking for granted, but really appreciative of. But to the extent that you can have a different space, go to a coffee shop, go to the lobby of your building, go to whatever is accessible to you, go work out in a park, block off time, put in your headphones, listen to music. That's a big one also. I feel like music is really healing,
Mhm.
and can help you think about something else, which sometimes is hard for me. Like a TV show doesn't captivate me always.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any others.
I think like I know some people are really into podcasts that I've like
I can't
dabbled in those here and there, but I have trouble focusing on them.
trouble focus.
And there's audiobooks too, but again, sort of like trouble focusing on them. For me, I just have to work out, or like I'm a nightmare to be around. And as long as I think it's like an evolution too, like understanding yourself. Like some people can go on vacation and they truly can just like disconnect and unplug for a week or 2 weeks at a time. I can make it like 48 hours,
But
maybe.
it, but you're labeling yourself as unable to do it. Like you can do it,
I could,
but
yes, I could.
it takes time. It takes, for me, it's like prep work. Like I mentally tell myself, like, okay, you're going on this trip. You're going to turn your phone on do not disturb from 9 to 6, and you're going to do it. And if you just like boss yourself around and set parameters up and force yourself to do them, you get into a good habit. Try it. Try to force yourself and like not let excuses pop up, and you'll find that like it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. You can take a week. And by the way, my thing is if you can't take a week, then the
Hmm.
company is not good, or you shouldn't be taking vacation. Maybe it's too early, and that's okay too.
Yeah, yeah, no, that is a good point because if you are if you leave for 3 days and everything just goes on fire, then you need to set up some better processes and procedures so that you can afford yourself that time.
Exactly. And also, I think, frankly, the hardest job of being in this position is hiring, which I know is exactly what you're trying to solve for, which is really, really awesome. But it's not even the day-to-day management or the product development. I mean, all of these things are very important, but hiring people that you can trust to let you get away is a really hard task, but it's definitely really crucial.
Yeah, I feel like especially those early hires are critical because they can really make or break things. And if you have that like core team that you're able to rely upon and you can grow with, then everything else can fall into place, and the subsequent hires sort of fall underneath those people, and so everybody's in line and in tandem with one another. But if they're not, then you end up with sort of disparate factions, and that's never a good thing.
No, but the good news is you can fix these mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So we've made good decisions. We've made decisions that were rushed, and definitely like take your time with hiring, um, but because it's people's lives, not because of anything other than just the fact that you should be respectful, I think, to what you're asking people. But yeah, it's the hardest part of the job by far. How do you judge someone's character without knowing them?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things, or one of the assumptions that we've been sort of proving out over the last sort of month and a half here is that most companies don't even really know what they need to hire for. Like they
Mhm.
have, an idea, maybe there's a job title, but once you get into like the nitty gritty of, if describe me your ideal candidate, there's so much, uh, what's the term? Like it's not black and white. It's not
Totally.
black and white at all. And that's partially contributing to the issue because if I can't clearly define and lay out like, what this role needs to be and what it entails, then you're inherently increasing your chances for failure with that person that you bring on because they may or may not actually end up fitting into whatever it is you truly need. Um,
And I mean, I'm sure you can speak to this. You probably have a ton of data on it, or at least anecdotally have seen, I'm sure. I find myself on LinkedIn jobs from time to time, whatever the reason is. I'm like pinged that I might be a good fit for something. It's to your point, it's like not well tailored. It's like, I think you gave the example of like a kid being targeted for like a shoe sales position at a women's shoe store, wherever
yeah.
we were talking about before. But I find myself on these job pages, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes because something leads me there. And have you noticed how companies will post a job and then a week later have, first of all, thousands of applicants, but repost a job for a different level? So they'll post a job as a director, and then 2 weeks later, you see a new job for the same role, same job description, but now it's a manager job. And then 3 weeks later, it's now a VP job, all with different pay ranges, different years of experience, but the same job description. I think is silly. But the best advice that I could give there is usually people within your network, to whatever extent, can recommend early partners. That doesn't have to be full-time hire. That could be a consultant, maybe someone that even once you scale the function out can help you hire a more junior person to, continue growing that department. There's a lot of options other than just like shooting at
Yeah.
shooting at the dark.
Sort of walk before you run. I think it was different with the agency because it really, at a certain point, there was just so much client demand. It was like, do you have a beating heart? And can you talk on the phone? It's like, great.
Good problem to have. That's a good problem to have.
But on the software side, and I'm just embarking upon this journey, but it feels like we've been able to be a little bit more strategic, because it's not like this burning, oh, we have to deliver against this SOW that, just came in from this client. And we're just continuing to try and, more people equals more revenue with an agency, whereas that, isn't necessarily the case with software. And so our CTO started out part-time for the first 6 weeks. And then he ended up, just spending so much time on it. He basically was full-time, and it worked so well that we're like, okay, great. And now he's been with us for 8 months, and it's been an amazing experience. But, we could have just jumped into the fire with somebody full time immediately, and then have had to have walked that back would have been pretty painful.
Yes. I think the biggest thing that I've heard from founders is they think that the part-time person, so like the CTO that you're describing, doesn't want a full-time opportunity. And that's the thing that I try to clear up is if there's a good fit, people are usually pretty flexible in that. Someone might have a built out agency in your case, and maybe less likely to, break that down to join a full-time team, but it never hurts to help. That's usually what I hear is the reason why people don't want to bring on a part-time person, but you never know. That's awesome that it worked out.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just has to do with just talk to the candidates or talk to your team members. I remember promoting some folks into managerial roles who never really wanted to be a manager. Just because you're a strong individual contributor doesn't mean that you'll be a good manager. And nor does it mean that particular team member actually even wants to be a manager. And so, some of our strongest team members are still individual contributors because they have no interest in managing. Mm-hmm. They just want to, execute and create a great work product. They don't want to have to deal with the responsibilities that come with that manager role.
What role do you see that most common with? Is there a department, sales, engineering, marketing, whatever?
I think engineering is the one that I've seen it happen the most. On the with the agency, we didn't really have a big engineering team, so it was more so on the email and SMS marketing side. So we had a few folks who were just really great with clients, with client success, client retention, but they didn't have any interest in taking over the email and SMS department. With engineers, I feel like more often than not they have zero interest in managing, and I didn't realize how different the role becomes as you work your way up from an engineer to a VP of engineering to the CTO. Mm-hmm. Being a CTO could not be more different than being hands-on keyboard, actually building, the product features and functionality that are being set forth. So I get it in one regard, but I think engineering for me. What about you?
Sales.
I
agree. Engineering that tied, but for me, they're tied. I think sales and engineering, you end up with people that are so passionate about what they do, and especially when they're really good at it, that sometimes I think that can get in the way of having the skill set of a good manager. Not always, not most of the time, but sometimes. Mm-hmm. It was hard for me personally when I was a sales rep at my last company to move into more of a team lead management role, because it was literally the opposite ask. At first, I was being asked to sell as much of the product as possible, and you were encouraged to beat everyone else and to be number one. And then you transition to being asked to do the opposite. Don't focus on yourself, focus on the team, get the team in a better spot. Don't worry about selling yourself. So it's literally the opposite ask. I could see that being similar in engineering. At least in engineering, you can like still review someone's code and give input. Sales is, yeah, very different skill set.
No,
But it
I
doesn't mean
definitely
that
agree with that because I've met people who they have zero interest and they just work their way up in terms of, now they're selling enterprise accounts or they're just doing like bigger deals, but they're sort of like the hired gun that gets brought in to take over and be number one. And like they thrive in that position and role being the actual salesperson versus having to be a manager and being responsible for other people's, sales efforts. And I could definitely see that. I think I would prefer to be the hired gun if I were a salesperson. Like I want to be the one selling. I want to have control of the deal. I want to bring it across the line. That would be my preference.
I'm curious why.
That was my favorite part of the agency was the sales process. Doing the prospect calls, building together the forecasting or, really whatever was needed to get it across the line. And then once it was across the line, like, okay, great. Let's have like the client success team step in and actually manage the day to day. But that was not as exciting for me as just, the growth and getting the signature across, getting the client onboarded, seeing it continue to, grow upon itself month over month. And I would just not, I'm just, maybe I could do it and I will have to do it, especially as we like build out a sales team here. That's just the reality. But it's somewhat, we never got to a point, like we only had like 50 team members. So we never got to a point where we had like a very large sales team. And I did offload it a bit, but at the end of the day, it was better if I was doing it. And so there was a lot of functions that I successfully sort of sent away and was able to, I guess, quote unquote, productize into other people's capabilities. But the sales one was one that just, I've talked to a lot of agency founders too. They've had trouble scaling that, or maybe they find one really great, salesperson, but they can't replicate that person. They're sort of stuck with just that one.
Totally. I had a similar thought, and I will say, like in sales, if the product, whatever it is, the service that you're selling or a SaaS product, if it's something that only the founder can sell, that's usually not a great sign. So I would encourage you to try to get other people to also attempt to sell. But I was in Toronto. Were you at Editions last 2 weeks ago?
No, not this one, but I've been to the prior ones.
It was fun. It was a good time. And I'll say this, I am sure the rest of the team is phenomenal, but I met Chelsea from CNR, Chelsea and Rachel, which is an agency. And this woman walked into the room, lit up the entire space. And I was talking to her and I was like, I don't know what your agency does, but I want to know. I want to buy it. I don't have a brand, but I want to have a brand so that I can work with you. Like that's how impactful it was. And whether that's from a founder or from a sales rep, at the end of the day, doesn't matter. But having those people that make you want to work with them. And I'm sure when you're pitching the product and the service, you probably have the passion that comes with it being yours. But yeah, I have to say that was a really great first impression. And in general, she's really like a perfect soul. So I have only good things to say. But that was a great first impression. She lit up the room. But it doesn't have to be the founder. It could be anyone theoretically.
Well, I think the founder-led companies, but even more so the founder-led brands, I've been seeing, be more successful than those that are just a brand. Like a lot of the CPG companies that are, sort of the Shopify Plus darlings right now, there's usually a face of it. And it doesn't even have to be, somebody who's a celebrity or famous to begin with. But like the story of the founder and the founder themselves is so interwoven into the company and the product that people are connecting and resonating with that person first and foremost. And then, as a byproduct of that, they're actually purchasing and becoming a customer.
You watch Shark Tank?
Yeah.
feel like that's every pitch on Shark Tank is like, I don't know, I'm selling like cat food. I've never had a cat before, but somehow the whole Shark Tank group's like sobbing over my story of the cat food. It's it's entertaining.
Yeah.
It's a little, but yes, the brands that have that tie from founder to the product or service is it just helps make you stand out. I think going back to the conversation earlier with apps like TikTok that are able to communicate potentially a false narrative so quickly also have another pretty negative potential impact, which is depending on who's being served what, like you may, and I've had this happen, I'm curious if you have too, but there will be weeks where I'm served an influencer and their product or a founder and their product. And then all of a sudden they disappear from my equation. My algorithm has set me on a different path and then I never see them again. So it's a little scary to have the brand be so attached to the founder because you might just not hear their story anymore. And then all of a sudden you're not seeing their product anymore either.
Yeah. So much of it is just the attention economy. And I've met people who have, $1 million businesses just off of TikTok shop, and they have a TikTok presence and they're basically selling themselves as like through the product. And
yes,
it's crazy what has been able to become realized by a lot of solopreneurs and people like that because of some of these new social channels that are available to them.
Yes, absolutely. It has democratized a lot of the business growth that people have just been able to like access. But at the same time, it's also, I was talking to a founder yesterday that her last company was in the skincare space. Mm-hmm. And she had a really successful start to the business. And then she had like 10 companies on Alibaba selling the same product and at cost. Mm-hmm. And she had to shut down the business. And that's another side effect. So, as the tech evolves and as things continue to change, like there's always a good and bad side. And we'll just have to be quick in response.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was really fun. Glad that we got to talk about some non-e-com things. I'm going to figure out how I can sleep well tonight so that I can have a good productive day tomorrow. But before we hop off here, can you let everybody know where they can find you online?
Yes, smartrr.com, smartrr.com. Also, feel free to add me on LinkedIn and pop in, shoot a message. Happy to chat with anyone. And thank you so much for having me. What a fun combo.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again. For everybody listening, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com and electricmarketing.com. And we will see you next time.
Thanks again.